Hello, everybody. I'm Rachel Phillips-Buck, VP for Student Success at Ferris Resources. I am not joined by our president today. Matt is taking this week off, but I will have Dr. Sherry Woosley for you in just a minute. So a couple of things I want to cover before we jump into the State of the Union. Next week is going to be our last cap and gown for the semester. So we take a little break over the summer and then we will be back. Next week, we're going to be doing a little bit more about slow productivity, which is our topic today, but also just kind of an end of the semester wrap up. And then also, you guys know how much I love rhythm of the academic year. So we have entered a new month, April. And the theme for April on your campuses is next semester plans. So this is the time where your students are thinking about, first of all, probably they've been sick recently because we've had kind of literally spring fever, everybody getting sick as spring starts. But then also thinking about who are they going to live with next semester. They're thinking about the end of the semester as they're in an academic recovery plan and how well did they execute that and what's going to happen for the next semester, whether they're off it or not. They're thinking about registering for their classes and their major and all of that sort of heavy stuff that comes at the end of the semester. So April's theme is next semester plans. Make sure you're thinking about students being stressed out about what's going to happen next. And also just making sure that they get registered before they come back in the fall. We want to grab them before they go home for summer because it's much easier to have those conversations with them in person before they go. And also, I just love the idea of giving them a vision of like, hey, when I see you, when you come back in August, here's what we're going to do and what we're going to talk about in the classes you're going to have. So that is your summary of rhythm of the academic year for now. And that means it's time for State of the Union. All right, you all, I'm kind of finding State of the Union less and less fun these days because there's so much crazy town stuff going on. But I found a couple of things that I think are relevant that I want to talk to you about today. So the first one is just, we've been having this conversation for like a month, maybe even longer than that, about Trump wanting to close down the education department. Just last Thursday afternoon, he signed an executive order telling the new head of the education department, Linda McCone, I think that's her name, to take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education, which is the strongest language that he's used since he's been back in the presidency to talk about the education department. He says that his plan is to disperse the department's core functions, which he is including Pell Grants, Title I funding, and providing funding and resources for students with disabilities. He wants to kind of put those out in other different parts of the government. You remember this is coming after they cut the department's workforce by half by either firing people or giving them kind of a buyout to quit. Also, as a reminder, we actually need congressional action to close the department, but this order tells McCone, I don't know how you say that, to push its closure to the maximum extent appropriate and permitted by law. So don't know exactly what that means, but got to keep an eye on that story because obviously it's going to affect a lot of what we do. And the other thing in the news that I want to talk about is, according to latest estimates, 2025, this year is going to be the year that we have the highest number of high school graduates peak. After that, what people call the demographic cliff is going to be heading our way, caused by declining birth rates starting in 2007. So a couple of things that I want to say about this. I think that enrollment cliff is very dramatic and maybe makes a news headline more interesting. It's not really a cliff. It's going to be more of a gradual decline over the next 15 years. The good news about that is that it's not like all of our students are going to dry up and now what are we going to do? It's that we have some time to prepare and to think about this. So we've been talking about it for a long time. But we're in the place now where you still have a lot of time in your institution to think about how you're going to adjust to that. And just because you have smaller numbers of high school students overall doesn't mean that there's nothing you can do to try to address that. It just means you can't mess around anymore. Like, that's for sure coming, and you've got to have some kind of strategy. It's really interesting. A study just released in December used machine learning to forecast changes in college closure rates based on this demographic decline. And it predicts about 80 additional colleges could close with an abrupt 15% decline in enrollment over the 2025-2029 period. So I just say that to say, like, it's something that you can't put off. You have to have a strategy. This article that Bailey put up for you has a lot of really great strategies. The first of which is to understand how this is going to affect different regions of the country in different ways. So, for example, the researchers estimate that graduates are going to drop about 27% in New York and 32% in Illinois. By contrast, they're projected to grow by double digits in some states like Tennessee, South Carolina, and Florida. So it's going to be very regional. It's going to depend on kind of where you are and what's happening there. And then also just remember, we have things like you have a fewer number of college students, but you can still go after them and enroll good amounts if you have a good strategy for how to do that. We also love the idea of doubling down on retention. So this article is like, you're going to have to make some kind of investment. You can't just expect this to automatically resolve itself. But one really great investment is in your retention rates. So figuring out how you're going to keep the students you have and help them go on to be successful, which we are all in the business of doing anyway. There's a forecast for a rise in Hispanic and multiracial students. So thinking about your strategy for supporting those students through to graduation. And then lastly is a non-traditional student recruitment, figuring out how to support an adult population, thinking about things like how do we serve students that have kids or have full-time jobs or are going to be mostly online students. All of those are going to give you an opportunity to improve your retention rates, graduation rates, and success rates for your students. So this, Sherry and I are going to talk a little bit about summer projects. That is a project that everyone on your campus should be thinking about over the next 12 years, how you're going to mitigate this decline in freshman population. All right, I have two more for you. This article out of Inside Higher Ed talks about Grinnell College and how they have this really remarkable program where they do 3 to 5 day externship experiences over spring break for students to expose them to the world of work and postgraduate lives. So what I think is really interesting about this program is that they actually are not just talking about job shadowing, but they actually are asking parents of Grinnell students and alumni to invite students to where they are and to spend 3 to 5 days with them. That includes staying in their house. And the reason they're doing that is because they're saying we want our students to understand what work life looks like, but we also want them to understand, depending on what you do, what your work-life balance looks like. So how much time do you spend at home? How much time do you spend in the community? What does that work-life balance look like? Basically, students apply and then staff share those applications with host families. Then they make these matches where they're like, okay, this is who's going to come and stay with you. Like I said, typically alumni and Grinnell parents. And then they do all this preparation for students. They have to attend orientations. They have to meet with their host before they actually go to see them. One of the things they've embedded in this program is that students are responsible for managing their own travel, which is like a whole other set of skills that students need to have. How do you book your airline flights and make sure that you have a ride from the airport and all of those different elements? And they also give students financial support from the college, depending on their level of need and how far away they have to go so that they can engage in this program. So I really love it. This spring, 95 students shadowed 82 hosts in 24 states, as well as in Singapore and India. So just thinking about, it's obviously a huge commitment from your host, but I think about if you have a student at school how willing you would be to welcome another student to come and shadow you if that's something they're interested in. And then also just how valuable it is for students to really put into perspective the difference between how much you're spending at work versus how much you're spending with your family and with your other commitments that are important, your hobbies, your community engagement, those sorts of things. So I think it's really, really remarkable. I would love to hear the challenges they faced. I think it's been around for quite a few years. So I think they've probably worked out some of those kinks that if you wanted to get it on your campus, it'd be really helpful to have a how-to in terms of how they did that. The last article I have for you is called Helping Gen Z Navigate Future Careers. This is a really interesting interview with a couple of people who are not in the higher education space. They actually have companies that then are working with colleges and universities to give students the things that they need in order to be successful. So the first one is Jane Swift. She's the president of a company called Education at Work. They're a nonprofit. And they have a model that gives students work-based learning experiences where they basically employ them, filling positions that would otherwise be filled by full-time workers. And they give them flexibility. They're actually paying them out of this nonprofit. They give them tuition assistance, all of those sorts of things. But the idea is that you have these students in experiential learning where they're able to really fully understand not just the work tasks, because anyone can learn something. Right? We all know when you first start a new job you've never done before, it's like drinking from a fire hose and there's a lot to learn and eventually you get up to speed. But this organization is really about some of those softer skills and social capital skills that you maybe don't have if your family doesn't come from the kind of profession that you're thinking of having. So Jane says, for example, that her two daughters have heard her run meetings in the car where she's on the phone with her colleagues or her employees or her boss, and they're having conversations about business that they absorb. They learn how you talk to your boss and how you run meetings and how you have those conversations with your employees. And some students don't have that advantage. So putting them in a position where that you can learn those things. And she says actually that a lot of questions students have are not about the skill work, because that's covered in their college classes, but actually it's in their like, hey, my boss gave me this project and now they're out of town and they're unreachable, and I'm really anxious about what I should do. Can we just talk through what the best process is for me to be in charge of this? Or I have to talk to someone on Slack about this problem. Can we talk about what's appropriate language on Slack versus, on Reddit or someplace else where you're more casual? So I think the whole article is worth a read because there's some really, really practical things in there. But I love thinking about it just in the context of these broader skills that once you have run a meeting or once you have adopted to how we talk professionally to each other, you have that and you can continue to build on it. But it's really scary in the beginning when you don't know exactly what you're going to do and how to manage those. So totally worth a read on that one to give you some insight into how you can build that into your own programs on campus. All right, that is the abbreviated State of the Union, which means that I get to welcome our guest, Dr. Sherry Woosley. Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
I feel like I usually give your whole title and all of this stuff, but I think you've been here long enough that I wish that we just titled every one of these with you Wisdom with Woosley. Well, don't you think that would be best?
I love that phrase. Probably the alliteration and the sort of
totally works. I think Bailey came up with that and we're like, yes, please. We want to use that one all the time.
I love it. Yep.
Well, has spring come to where you are?
Yes. And then we had snowflakes a couple days ago and freaked us all out because it didn't hit the ground. No. We just saw them and then and we're back now. So yeah, it's 55 right now. That's not bad.
No, that's great. I think about our Canadian friends, and we have some friends in the very, very north that don't call this the spring semester. They call it the winter semester. They're like, we don't see spring for a really, really long time. So don't even try it with that. All right. Well, I want to talk today. Our book for this year is Slow Productivity. And I want to, first of all, just double down on why we've picked this. And then I want for us to go through some of just the practical tips. You and I were talking before. This is Cal Newport. We covered this book that he did, Deep Work, a couple of years ago. he's just you said it so well. Like, he's just super thoughtful.
Yeah.
He probably talks like 1/10 as fast as I do.
Probably.
So he's like a little bit more like measured as he's explaining these things. But his premise is just, we don't have healthy lives when we're frenetic.
No.
And when we're doing too many things and thinking about too many things. And I think we can all agree that that is a message that higher education professionals need to fully absorb. I think it was true before the pandemic. I think a lot of things broke during the pandemic, and we have still not recovered from them.
Yep.
And I don't know, Sherry, you always have a lot to say about this idea of burnout in our work.
Well, I also think, I mean, we have a society that rewards busyness and hectic activity. And I mean, how many podcasters get on and go, you know, what have you done today? Blah, blah, blah. Like that energy level is just a bit much, isn't it? And I don't know about you. I had a day off the other day, and I was sitting in a chair and I was reading a book, and I was like, wait, I should be doing something. Is there laundry? Is there this? And you have to like learn how to not do that. We don't get rewarded for pausing.
We really don't. And I think, you know, Cal says in this book that part of the problem is we do kind of performative productivity, because sometimes long projects with deep work, we don't feel like we're showing up in that frenetic way, right? We're not showing up like, oh, now I've got to go because I've got this meeting or whatever. Sometimes it is just sitting and reading a book and looking out the window and thinking about that. And so he makes the argument that a lot of us have developed strategies to show that we're productive instead of to be productive. Yeah. And that is being quick on our emails and always available on Slack and texting and meetings and all of that kind of stuff
about everything we're doing. And
yeah,
I hadn't thought about this, but you just reminded me, there's a great book, an old book about creativity. And it's Orbiting the Giant Hairball. I don't know if I ever told you that one. I love it. But there's a really lovely chapter or story in it about creativity. And the analogy that the author uses is cows out in the pasture. And they're just chewing and they're doing nothing and they're whatever. And he makes the argument of, imagine a productivity expert at the edge of the field going, make more milk, go. And it's so ridiculous, but at some level, isn't that what we do? They are being productive, but they don't look at it.
Yeah, that's right. And it can't be rushed. That kind of work can't be rushed. Takes a while to develop. Just leave it alone.
Yeah, it doesn't look busy, but it is busy.
Right. Yeah, I love that so much. So this call to, our word for this year has been intentionality. Yeah. And this call to just be like, we have to be very intentional about where we put our focus, where we put our energy. And really, I think we're at the place where we have to revisit some of the choices that have been made over the last, I don't even think 5 years, I think 10 years in higher education. And really say, like, is that the best use of my time? And how do we make determinations about that? So one thing, when Matt and I talked about the first chapter of this book, I really struggled because it's all about productivity. And he talks a lot about this, like, thinking work. And I was like, in higher education, it's really hard to talk about productivity. Like, if you said to a dean of students, were you productive today? They'd be like, what are you talking about? Right. But if we think of productivity as your product, which is students, how do we create good thinking, well-rounded citizens? Then I think we can feel a little bit better about the productivity of work in higher education. And maybe doesn't make us as squeamish as because you can't count it necessarily, right? So,
and if you do count it, it's probably not effective.
Right.
How many meetings you had doesn't actually indicate the quality of your work.
Yeah, Sherry. And I think that's exactly why people count instead of feeling comfortable in their productivity. I think they are trying to show of this when, like you said, sometimes it just is happening organically, and it would be very hard for me to be able to give you a measurement of the impact of the work that I did today. So I think it's incredibly important. All right, so here is, at this point in the book, this is what Cal Newport says, his sort of theory about how we should be thinking about slow productivity. And then I want for you and I to make a case for this. So he says, you have to strive to reduce your obligations to the point where you can easily imagine accomplishing them with time to spare. Leveraging this reduced load to more fully embrace and advance the small number of projects that matter most. So, first of all, can we just imagine for a second? Let's just go to Nirvana on Earth, which is like, I can accomplish everything I have to today, and we'll have some time left over. Wouldn't that be incredible?
There's a part of me that goes, I can't imagine it, which is not true. I have better imagination than that, but it takes some effort, right?
I know. Yeah, because our tendency would then be to like, okay, well, then I could do more. Like you said, like, oh, well, if I have time to read a book, then I have time to do more laundry or work on that project or whatever. So this first space where we build into our lives time for just slowness, we just can be slow instead of being, again, frenetic and moving through. Yeah. But the other thing that I really love that he says is we get to fully embrace and advance the small number of projects that matter most. And to me, that is all about using intentionality in the way that you plan your day and your week and your semester and your year to say, these are the things at the core of what I do. And then some of this other stuff, I'm not going to do it. Right.
Yep. And isn't it also about giving yourself permission to not work at full speed? Like, because there are many times where I'll ask somebody on my team, okay, how much time do you think that'll take? Well, I think I can get it done in a day. Okay, then let's plan for 2. Well, right. No. And it's so funny how we want to put a deadline on something that is maximum sprinting speed, when that isn't probably the best choice.
Yeah. It's such a good question as a supervisor to say, well, if I gave you 2 days, would it be less stressful? Yeah. And could you do a better job? Right? Yeah. Because that's really his argument is like, we don't have to live at a stressful pace. Yeah. And also, we do not do our best work when we have a list of 25 things we have to get done today. So we're just like on to the next, yeah. Instead of being like, I mean, I'm going to just be honest, Sherry, like both my undergraduate and my master's degree, I was like, when is it due? I'm going to start at exactly the time so I can get my paper due when it's due. Right. And in my PhD program right now, I'm like trying this thing, which makes me very uncomfortable, but I think it's the right thing to do, which is like, what if I got a paper done a week beforehand? Yes. And then after like 4 days it's finished, I come back and reread it and be like, I think I could tweak that. I think we could change that a little bit. And then I have 2 days and then I turn it in. And I don't like it because I work to stress. But my papers are much better when I don't write my last sentence and be like, turn it in. Right?
I had a conversation with one of my kids about something. She needs to do some essays for this application. And she's like, I don't have time to do it this weekend. I said, great, totally fair. But it was so interesting because I said to her, why don't we talk about what the prompt for the essay is over dinner? And then you can just let your brain work behind the scenes for the weekend and let it go. And she had that same of, well, I need to start it and then do it and then be done. And it's like, wait, let's do the whole timeline out a little bit and give ourselves a moment.
Right. Because back to your analogy of the cows, it might look like I'm not doing anything in this intervening time, right? But actually, what you said is right. Like your brain needs space to be like, oh, that's actually connected to this, or here's how I would explain that, or this is what I think we could say about that, right? And it's just so foreign. I think we're just so out of practice that it makes everybody nervous.
Yeah, to extend the time on anything makes everybody just kind of panic. So.
For sure. So he makes this argument that basically we just saying we're going to do it slower doesn't mean we're going to do less. It means we're going to do better.
Yes.
And really being able to identify what those things are. Also, he talks about this thing, which I think we are really remiss in calling out so often, which is overhead tax for an actual thing. So this is where it's like everything you do comes with this administrative overhead tax that you don't count, that comes due. And then you're like, oh no, that actually is going to take me a lot longer because I have all of these other things. I can't just deliver this thing. So his example is like faculty at the beginning of COVID having to shift to online. It's like, yes, you have to change your content, right? So you have a format where you've got to change it. But then you have to learn your learning management system. That's a whole thing. And then you've got to figure out how to do feedback. And then you have to figure out how to draw what you're used to drawing on the whiteboard in your Zoom sessions, right? And all of that is overhead tax for just switch to online, right?
Yeah. And the communication with the students is totally different. And this is that. Yeah. So you have the learning, but you also have the processes,
right,
that don't work the same.
Yeah. I was thinking about this in terms of specifically like our early alert teams and our care teams. And I think I've said to you before, one time I was showing a president like all of the work that our teams do in our system, like everything that they do. And he was like, that just seems like a lot of work. And I was like, yeah, so here's what I did, Sherry. I wrote down, if we said on a campus, if I think back to my work in early alert and I'm like, okay, I got a referral, right? But now I have to explain to my campus, what is the overhead administrative task that one referral of a student comes? I came up with 16 different things that I have to do related to that, which is like, I've got to read the referral. I've got to assign the referral. I've got to do research about what's already been done. I've got to email the student. I've got to get feedback from faculty. 16 different things.
Oh, yeah.
That you might have somebody who's like, oh, yeah, can we just increase referrals by 200%? And you're like, not unless I get some help. We can't. So being able to count that, and we always talk about it in our office, like, I don't know if you have these things where someone says, can you just, and then says a thing that you're like, no, I cannot just whatever the thing is, right? I think about this with like, can you just write an email to the client and explain this thing to them? Or can you just do an audit of our system or design a new slide for this presentation?
Yeah.
And it's like, I cannot just do that. I can do that with a bunch of work. And I need to be able to say, in this project, you have just asked me to do 5 hours of work. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Can I fit that in? But let's be honest about what it takes, right?
Yeah. I have and this is a systems design thing, but every now and then, and I just have this super vivid memory of somebody saying, well, I just need a button that does this and this in the system. And I was just like, that's a whole restructure behind the scenes to get that button working. I think a lot of times what we see is just the end product or just a little piece of something.
Yeah.
It just needs to do this.
No, I know that's such a great example. Like, I can get my programmers to put a little button where you want it.
Yeah.
What the hard part is when you push that button, what is all of the stuff that it actually has to do, right?
Yes.
And I was thinking about this in student life and student affairs, how often, because I think because we have a casual sort of work environment in those areas, like if someone's like, hey, can you just check on the student?
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, but I really need to be able to make transparent, if I take that job seriously, here's what it means. I've got to look at their schedule. I got to figure out where they're going to be. I've got to walk to where they're going to be. I've got to run into them. Then I have to be like, oh, how's your math class? Right? Like just all of those little pieces that come from the request of, can you help the student get an internship? Yes, but for every student I do that, that is 5 hours of work. And it's okay. We just have to name it. Right.
And don't you think sometimes too, people will say, well, just have some people help you. like on a presentation. Well, if there's 3 of you, it's less work. Well, actually, no, it's not, because I got to shepherd everybody. I got to get everybody together. I've got to figure out who's going to do what. I got to find the other people.
Yeah.
Like a friend of mine just had one where somebody was like, well, we want faculty more involved in the residence halls. And she said, that's great. But do you understand? Yeah, the steps to actually get them to come to things.
Right.
And it was it was just, if you could just,
that's exactly right. And also, I mean, as you're saying that, I think there's like, let's name the overhead tax, but also let's name the barriers we have to overcome. What you just said is a great example of like, okay, I've got to go find the faculty. I've got to explain it to them. I've got to give them some times that work. I've got to get them, like, I have to do all that stuff. But then also you have the barrier of faculty are busy too. Yeah. So I can't say like, hey, can you just come for an hour? Because what's
you're passing the just from one to the next.
You just come for an hour to be fine. No, because what's going to happen then are you're going to meet more students who want to come to your office hours and they want to talk to, right? So, I think we have to get better of personally, and I don't think that's a thing. I mean, of course, it's wonderful if your boss is aware of that, like you said.
Yeah.
Take 2 days. Why don't you take 2 days to do that?
Let's be reasonable about it.
Yeah. But I think that it's something you can do for yourself. And what Newport says is you have to sort of put a flag on your schedule that says, I'm not making it up. That's going to take more time than you think it is with just that request, right? Yeah. So I love that. He really says doing fewer things does not mean accomplishing fewer things. And that's because we all know, like in that early alert process that I mapped out in my brain, if I can sit down and do those 16 steps in 1 hour, that will take me an hour.
Yeah.
That never happens though, right? Ooh. I have 1 student and 16 steps and I'm going to do 1 and 2. And then I've got to go do something else. And then I'm going to be like, where was I? Okay. Now I think I can do 3 and 4 and 5. And then and it's not that I'm accomplishing more because the startup cost is heavy to walk away and come back. Yeah. It's just that maybe I feel better about it because it feels busy, right?
I can't remember what the research is, but every interruption takes another 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So if I'm trying to do 20 things, think of the number of interruptions.
Yeah. Versus I'm going to start on this thing and go start to finish and then it's done. And then I can move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
I don't know how we got tricked into feeling like multitasking makes us more efficient. I don't know how that happened, but I don't think it's true.
It's not. No, the research said it's not. So.
Yeah. Okay. So I love the timing of this because we have already started to hear about summer projects.
Oh, yeah.
Which, this is the thing where it's like, we're so busy. We can't think about that right now. We don't have capacity to be able to think of big things, to be able to be creative, think of new initiatives. We have to have a list of summer projects and then half of them will get done. And then if they don't get done, we're just going to put them to next semester. But I think the reason people like summer projects is because it is a time in higher education where you have fewer emergencies, where you actually can plan out a little bit more like on this day, I'm going to take the whole day to think through this more strategic, bigger piece of the puzzle instead of being afraid because we have students on campus that I'm just going to be interrupted and taken away all the time, right?
And don't you think we also give each other more permission to take those days in the summer? So it's not even just the students, it's us together.
Right.
If Rachel says, hey, I need this day in the summer to do this, I go, oh yeah. Whereas I might not do that in the school year.
Yeah, you're like, it's the middle of the semester. You cannot have the day. There's stuff going on. You cannot have the day. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. He talks about in this idea, which my team is going to laugh at this because I was like, oh, okay, well, I better pay attention. It's this idea of legacy from years of work, which is where we just have things that we've put on our plate because we did them. We just have done them that way. We just keep doing them. Yeah. And taking a pause and being like, does that work? Like, is that really a good idea? Because if all we do is ever add more things, then we get ourselves in a position where we are too harried, and we actually can't identify anymore what is the core of our work, right? So I think, Sherry, you and I are similar about this. If you're a person who has ideas all the time, right? And so I'll say to Z, like, Z, I'm so sorry, but I have another idea. I think we should, I just can't help it. I cannot help but come up with another really cool thing that we can do. Yeah. If that's all you do, and don't go back and say like, yeah, that was an idea, but we're going to take that off the plate. You just get overwhelmed. Have you found that? Do you have that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I was asked just yesterday, I was doing a guest lecture for a class, and somebody said, how did you end up where you are? And I said, because at my old job, I ended up with 5 jobs and I couldn't do them all. So then I came here where it was one job, right?
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that we often have trouble taking we often see these choices of we have to do it or we have to say no completely to it. And I tend to use the strategy, if I'm thinking about it and being like careful about it, I tend to say, what if we slow walked this? Would people notice? So I'm not taking it off, but what if we slow walked it? What if we started doing it every other year? What if we so that gives me a little more wiggle room and permission.
Yeah.
Because then I start to see if it's really valuable or not.
And because everything feels very, very important. It feels very important. And I would say I'm very lucky that most of, like Braden the other day, I was doing webinars for every one of our associations. So it's like 7 webinars in the spring semester. And she's like, hey, I don't think that makes sense. Why don't we do one and invite everyone? And I was like, really? And she's like, well, why don't we try it? And I was like, okay, why don't we try it?
And see who objects or see who maybe still needs one.
Yeah. It's a great strategy to be like, well, it's not, we don't have to cross it off the list, but can we
try this or try that
one time where it's less work for us? And if it doesn't turn out as well, we can talk about putting it back. Right. So I really love that. Yeah. Z's like, there's lots of chatter. Z's like, slow walk is such a good and actionable phrase. Like, we're just going to move forward.
We're going to slow walk it and see what happens.
Yeah.
I think of these things as experiments. Let's experiment with something and see, because if I slow walk it and there's an uproar, then I know it is important. And then I got to figure out how to deal.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing to me is that if I begin with a conversation about getting rid of it, everybody will panic. So if we slow walk something and nobody seems to panic, then I can start adjusting. And then when people start to panic, I can go, guys, we didn't really use it.
Right. Right. Everyone settle down. Remember, we talked about this. Yeah. That's so interesting. I think also it appeals, when we talk about Myers-Briggs and that very last letter, like, how do you like to plan your life? You're either a J, which is like, I want the plan, or you're a perceiver, which is like, I'm very adaptable. I think a slow walk makes perceivers and judgers feel better. Yes. Because for J's, you're like, we have a plan. We are going to move forward with it, but in a much slower pace. Mm-hmm. And for perceivers, they're like, it's not settled. It's not that we're not going to do it or we are going to do it. We're just going to be in ambiguity for a little bit as we walk down.
And we're going to let everybody have their feelings about it. You can be committed that we have to do it. I can be committed that we have to get rid of it. But we're going to try an experiment that gives us more evidence for either way.
Yeah. I think it is a great summer project for individuals to sit in their office and make a list of all of the legacy of work that they have, and just to have those real conversations and also, Sherry, I find that if we talk about, if we don't do this thing, what resources and energy does it free up to do something else that we're excited about? That feels better than just stopping, right? To be like, we're going to stop all of this stuff, but it's then going to give us a new project that we really feel energized about. I really love that.
The research on money says giving up money is much more painful than actually deciding, like, to never have had it.
Right.
And so I get why people don't want to give up a project.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay. The next thing that I want to talk about, because I find this, I wrote this in my notes and then afterwards I wrote, ouch. So this is another one. Yeah. Okay. How do we know when to say no to something? We have to feel sufficient personal distress to justify the distress that comes from saying no.
Yeah.
So what he's saying is basically like, if somebody asks you to do something, you're so much more likely to say yes because it's upsetting to tell your colleagues no. It's upsetting to tell students no. You don't want to be seen as a person who sets limits, doesn't have enough time, you can't get behind a good project, right? So it's distressing. Yeah. Well, the only way you could say no is it has to be worse for you to say yes. Yeah. Like, I literally do not have any time to do that. My mental health is going to suffer. I am not going to spend time with my kids if I say yes to that. And for so many people, that is the only way they know you cannot accept that.
This is to me where one area where leaders have to step up and help people.
Yes.
Because I think like it, and I don't know if this is exactly how my folks see it, but they know if they bring me new stuff, I'm going to go, wait. And so I can be a little bit of that bad guy pause break in the conversation. You know, I need to check with Sherry, gives them a little wiggle room to think it through. And it doesn't have to be a dire situation to say no.
Right.
But I think, you know, so many of the best people I have are super conscientious and helpful. They want to do everything.
I know.
So it is up to me to help people say no, or to, I don't know, be the bad guy and say no.
Yeah. I mean, I will tell you that there are things that happen where I'm like, I mean, whether or not this is actually true, what I think to myself is Matt would kill me if I said yes to that. Yes. You know what I mean? Like if I went in and I was like, hey, somebody needs me to do this crazy town thing and I can do it. And he'd be like, have you lost your mind? You know, you're not going to do that. Right. So it's so helpful to have that person over you that you're like, no, they will be like, what, why would you?
They can be that voice of real logic. So it doesn't have to be the make or break mental health issue. It can be a no, this just doesn't make sense.
It does not make sense. Yeah.
And it's so critical for the leader to take that role, because if they don't, that makes it even harder for somebody to say no.
Yeah. If I came to Matt and I was like, here's a crazy thing I agreed to do, and he's like, yeah, good, you should do that, I would be like, okay.
Or he brought you 5 more, right. You know,
like, you do that 3 times. That feels like really cool. Yeah. So I think you're right. I will say it is such a joy to work with people who want to be good workers, who want to take on all the things. I'm so grateful. I have worked with teams where it's not like that. And you're like, can somebody work, without, would be really nice. Anyone? But I think for sure you have to have real conversations about like, how do we set limits so that you feel good about protecting yourself and caring for yourself. So for sure. Okay. So let's get to some really practical things, because you know how I love practical things. I like big ideas, but I like for us to be like, okay, but what do I actually do? So one of the things in this book that he talks about is making really specific rules for yourself around what you will and you won't do. And he says, you can't just say like, I'm going to do less. You have to identify the core things that you should be spending your time on. And then saying, if it doesn't relate to those, I'm just going to out of hand say no. And I'm not going to feel bad about it, because it's peripheral. It doesn't get me to the place that is most important in the role that I'm in. And so I think, this summer, as you're thinking about next semester, just identifying what are those core things. When I worked in an institution, I was doing advising, I was working with at-risk students, I was doing academic recovery, and I was helping students choose a major. And there just came a place where I was like, you know what? My mission is about helping students pick a good major and have good footing in college. So all of this other stuff, if it doesn't relate to our deciding students, I just can't spend my energy on that. Someone else has that as their mission critical thing. Yeah. And it really helps you focus then what you do in a day.
Yeah.
So, okay. So he says, first of all, you've got to limit your mission to 1 to 3 things. 2 is best, but you probably cannot support more than 3 missions.
Okay.
And he says, it's your mission when it is wildly important.
Oh, I love that phrase, Val. Wildly important.
Yeah. So you just sit down and you say, okay, well, what are the things that are wildly important to me in the role that I'm in?
Yeah.
We've got to identify those things. And then we've got to have laser focus on everything that happens in my day and my week and my semester supports these missions that I've identified.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, you also have to limit your projects. And he talks about projects as a work-related initiative that can't be completed in one session. Okay. So this is like, we have to have a couple of meetings about this. I have to think about it. We're going to be planning it. And he's really clear to say, like, some of those are really finite. Like, I'm in charge of orientation. I'm going to plan it. We're going to do it. And then it's over.
Okay.
And then some of them are never ending. So my job is to get our students to declare a major and get registered for next semester. And I might do it now, but it's rolling. It's like I've never done that for all of our students, right? I'm just continuing to complete that project.
Yeah.
And so this idea of identifying your projects and then creating timelines for them, and saying, I'm full up for the next 2 months of projects. So when someone comes to me and says, can you do this thing? I can say, I can do it, but I won't get to it for 2 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I love. That is so helpful.
I've watched departments do that well. And at first I was like, they say yes to everything. And then I was like, oh, wait, they say yes down the line.
Yeah.
Yes, down the line. And then people have to really decide how important it is. Because if they're not going to get to it, like it's April now, if they're not getting to it till July, do you still want it in July?
Right.
And suddenly now it falls off the list. And I was like, whoa, isn't that cool?
It's a magic trick. Well, it's funny. We always say in higher education, you either hit it on time or you have a year, because it's like you need it in August. And if you don't do it in August, nobody cares about it till the next August, right? Or we need it for registration. And if you don't get it for registration, nobody cares about it until the next registration. So he's pretty bossy about figuring out how much time something is going to take you. And then actually looking at your calendar and blocking off that amount of time. And if you can't find it, you have to say no. So if you're like, this project's going to take me 15 hours and they need it done in the next 2 weeks, and I'm looking at my calendar and I cannot find 3 blocks of 5 hours each, I have to say no, because I'm not going to be able to actually do it. Yeah. Which is really helpful, I think, because, we always talk about like past self and how your past self either sets you up for success or failure. And some of that is my past self is always very eager to say yes to things. And then my current self is like, why did you do that?
I've had a few of those projects.
Yeah. Yes. Like, now I have to do it. Well, how am I going to find time for that? Yeah. So if you put your past self in charge of, hey, you need to look at future self and make sure we're going to have time on the calendar to be able to get that done, then you get along much better with yourself in the future. Okay. The last thing that he talks about is limit your daily goals. Which actually, Sherry, I don't know how that one hits you, but I think of the 3, that one is the hardest. Yeah. Because I think identifying and limiting your missions, of course we should do that. That's how we have a powerful, meaningful life, is by identifying things that are wildly important and saying, yes, I'm committed to those. Right. And then projects can be really big. And so of course it makes sense. Like if you can't find the time in the calendar, you can't do it. But this idea of limiting your daily goals and your daily activity, I think, is where we get stuck, because there is the tyranny of the urgent. Yes. There are things that come up that's like, well, not today. I'm not going to be able to do all of the wildly important stuff today because these things have happened. I think that is the hardest one to control. I don't know about you.
So what do you do for strategies right now? Because I can tell you mine.
Tell me.
Mine is today's to-do list has to fit on a Post-it note.
Oh, that's good.
Now I can write small and get into trouble. But that notion of once I have the Post-it note and it has a few things, suddenly things don't fit on the Post-it note. So it's got to go on tomorrow's Post-it note.
Yeah.
And there's something about, for me, I know people have electronic versions and they're really cool and I'm wasting paper. But for me, there's something about the concreteness of this.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I do, which I love, is I do the Post-it note at the end of the day for the next day.
Oh,
because that way I can leave work and not have to remember what I need to do tomorrow. It's on the Post-it. And I come in tomorrow and I go, oh, here's the Post-it note. Okay, now I know what to do. It makes those transitions easier. It makes me calmer at night. And now sometimes I get a couple of Post-it notes going, but then I'm very clear. I'm not going to get through all of this.
Yeah, that's right.
I can't.
I like that idea because I do think, this idea that when you write it down, you can release it from your brain, which in my family is hilarious because for me, a lot of times I'll say to my daughter a thing so I can release it. And then she'll be like, what did you tell me that? And I'm like, no, love, I gave it to you. It's gone. I don't know where it is anymore. Yeah. But that idea of like, hey, I'm leaving work and here's how I'm going to release all of this stuff. And tomorrow I'm going to address that. I think that's a great idea.
It's been just a huge help because otherwise you end up stressing and to take 10 minutes at the end of the day and go, all right, what are the top priorities for tomorrow?
Yeah.
Just calms everything.
I totally agree with you. Another thing that I've tried that I really like is my team knows that I have days for things.
Yeah.
Which is like, on Tuesday, it's cap and gown day or it's direct report day. Those are the two things that I do on that day. We build them into the calendar. And if you want to schedule something else, don't do it on Tuesday because I don't have any capacity on Tuesday, right?
I love that.
Yeah. On Thursdays, I will meet with any of our clients who need to meet with us all day Thursday. Like, here's my Calendly link. You guys put it on my calendar. I will meet with whoever. But what I think it does is then it gives you this focus for the day. Yeah. Where you're not being pulled and pushed in all of these different directions. And it allows the other people that you work with to make some assumptions about your schedule so that you're easier to get in touch with, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I just know this is a whole day where all Rachel is doing is this one thing. And so I can kind of slip in there if I fit in kind of that schedule. I really love it.
Well, I also love that because that whole notion of interruptions, if I'm in that mode all day, I don't have to go back and forth between we're planning a big project and we're doing this and I love that.
Yeah, I found that.
Now I might have to think about that.
Okay. Well, that's a good one. I'll Post-it note. You do days of the week.
I love that.
One more thing he says that I think is so smart. He talks about putting things on autopilot. And I think higher education actually is this could be a really powerful thing. He talks about like, okay, well, every Friday, I park in this parking lot and I walk across campus so I can have collisions with my students. Yeah. And then I go eat in the cafeteria every Friday.
Love it.
And then I go to the library, which everyone knows I'm going to be there and I can run into more students. And then I teach my class and then I get coffee. And this idea that you set up your schedule location-wise to help you focus on what you need to focus on right now, I think makes so much sense, especially when we're doing work where we need to be out and about and run into our students and have time for them to come up and approach you and those sorts of things. So I think that's fun.
Well, I love it for a couple of reasons. It automates it so I don't have decisions about it.
Right.
I don't have to decide, am I going to go there? What am I going to, you just do it. And they say for habits, for everything, that's key, is not to reduce the number of decisions. And the other thing I love about that is that notion of co-location. They talk about that all the time for like, if you want to work out, make sure your workout clothes are right next to your shoes, right next to the door, co-locate things. Again, so that you don't get distracted, so you don't have to make decisions. Yeah, lovely.
I always find that when I come to a point of decision, I'm going to usually pick to be lazy about the thing. You know what I mean? Like, do you want to do this or you want to do this? And mostly If you set it up so you're not deciding, you've just already decided. And so then you just walk the path, right? Then you're in a much better position to not opt out, to be like, oh, but this other thing is more important. Maybe I should do this instead. I think it could be really helpful for your schedule.
Especially at the end of the day.
Right. Your brain is tired and you're like
decision fatigued out. Yes.
So Sherry, I think coming out of this, and I'm really thinking about, like, we're at the time in the semester, I think everybody's really tired because they're doing registration. You know, we're almost done with the semester. Yeah. I'm thinking about how do we use our summertime to set up success for the fall. And I just think coming out of this conversation, the 3 things that I wrote down, it would be so helpful for you to have a vision of going into the summer are, first of all, what is your mission? What is that wildly important work? And how can you articulate it so other people understand when you say no to a thing, it's not because you're being snotty. It's because I have these things that are the most important thing and I've got to invest all of my energy. So I think everybody should write down their mission. Matt and I were talking about this earlier, and it's like, you have to go up a level until you can't do that anymore, right? So it's like, my mission is to help students. Okay, which students? Students who don't have a major. Okay, why? Because I want them to be successful and to graduate. Okay, why? Because I think that having a college education changes a family tree. And I'm really invested in that. Okay, well then there's something wildly important about that you can carve out in a way that maybe if you just stopped with help students, you could be confused.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
Okay, the second one is you have to make a list of all of the legacy work that you have.
I love that. Yep.
What are all of the things that you're doing because you've always done them and you haven't ever taken time to be like, is this efficient and effective and does it make sense? And I mean, after this conversation, I think we add to that and put some of them on the slow walk short list, right?
What a great phrase, isn't it? Slow walk. I think even Z was like, slow walk. Yeah.
What are the 4 that we're going to be like, we'll see about these ones, right? And then I think it would be so helpful. I think you should do this for a lot of different tasks, but I think in terms of practicing, I think you pick one task that you do all the time and you list all of the overhead tasks for that. Yeah. So when somebody says, can you just design a slide for this new presentation that we're going to do? Let me tell you, I can, but that's 5 hours of work. And here's every single thing that's going to be in terms of administration. Because then I think it gives you a little bit more confidence and freedom to say either, yes, I can do it, but understand it'll take me 5 hours. Yeah. Or yes, I can do it, but I'm not going to I can't put it on my calendar for 3 weeks because I just don't have that on my calendar. So I think all 3 of those things would set you up to have some real delineation about how you can cross things off the list and focus on the most important things.
Yeah. Well, and it just gives you a way to think through things pretty nicely. That isn't, as you said, just do less. Because I hate that's just so say no to things.
Probably people are not going to do that, right? We have to have some actual thoughtful processes to how we say no. So I think this conversation is coming at a really, really good time because I think people will in a couple of weeks have more capacity to be able to do that. And Sherry, I think it's so helpful to have all of your team understand this language so that we can refer to it with each other, right? Like I'm not trying to be difficult. It's just that's not a mission critical thing for me. So I'm probably not going to be able to get to it for a while. So,
or even this is a legacy project. Can we think about it?
Yeah.
That categorizes it in a different way, doesn't it?
For sure. Yeah. So good. Yeah. All right, friends. Well, I got to go buy some Post-it notes.
The colors you like. Okay?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a great suggestion. Thank you so much for this conversation. I think it's going to be really helpful to our listeners. So I appreciate your insight as always.
Hey, and I'm going to start, blocking a day or 2 for specific things.
Yeah.
I love that.
All right. Always good to talk to you. Bye.